All right, guys, my name is Mike Miller. I'm the managing partner here at the Music Box. And guys, this is pretty far into our 12th season of this series. I think that's amazing, and to me, it's a testament to Clevelanders and your interest in our history and, just kind of celebrating the great town that we live in. And tonight's topic, one of my all-time favorite, the great bars. I always like to start out and thank a few folks. First of all, believe it or not, guys, Yingling is a sponsor of this series. Do you guys know it's the #1 beer here in Cleveland right now? And this fella is enjoying one of our tall boys, which you cannot get it less than you're spending on it tonight. So we use their money to help promote the series and really appreciate their support. But more importantly, from day one of the supporters of this series, the primary supporter of this series has been the Western Reserve Historical Society. And they changed the name of their museums around University Circle to the Cleveland History Center about 7 years ago. Big round of applause for them, guys. I had some friends visiting Cleveland over the holidays, and I brought them down there, and we spent about 2 hours on the Euclid Beach Carousel. It was going so fast we were afraid to get off. It really is a cool little thing that they've rebuilt there, guys. So strongly recommend. I know you want to bring friends and family to the Rock Hall when they come in town, and that's cool to do, but this is an amazing museum on the east side, guys. It really does a great job telling you the story of the history of Cleveland. So now I have to promote 2 upcoming shows. First of all, next week, who's come for a Mike Polk night? Oh, lots of you. All right, cool. All right, this is one of the really fun things that we've been adding to our schedule here. Mike Polk is one of Cleveland's most well-regarded stand-up comics. He's been voted the best stand-up comic in Cleveland for years and years. He's also now a featured newscaster on WKYC here in town. But what happens on this night is he partners with a fella from the Cleveland Public Library. They have the largest collection of historic Cleveland photos. Like tens of thousands of photos. Most of these haven't been seen in years. So John Skirdick from the library mines the collection and sends a bunch of them to Mike, and he kind of gets them in order on a slideshow. We pull the screen down, and you get to see some of these most amazing photos of history from Cleveland. And John, the librarian, starts telling you what's in the photo. Mike disagrees with him and has a different point of view of what's in the photo. It's hilarious, guys. So that's next Wednesday. And then, guys, I'm very excited, very honored. Terry Pluto is coming back, sports writer for The Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. He has a great book out, Why the Hell Can't This Team Find a Quarterback? I might have added the hell. So he's going to talk about the Browns. He's going to talk about the Cavs. He's going to talk about the upcoming Guardians season. That's a fabulous night, guys. So that's the week after next on Wednesday, too. So put those on your calendar, everybody. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks, Mike.
All right, great. Listen, I know you've attended a couple of these in the last couple of years, so you kind of have a sense. And you actually said it in your book a little bit. The first questions that Clevelanders ask each other, where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? So why don't you launch there?
All righty. My early years, I grew up on East 93rd and Union. And from East 93rd and Union, we went to Slavic Village, However, back then it wasn't called Slavic Village. It was Warszawa, it was Goosetown, and all the other little neighborhoods that were tucked away on the southeast side of Cleveland. I went to Holy Name High School. Well, before that, my grade school was St. Joseph Byzantine, which was off East 93rd in Orleans, a very small little school, and then went to the old Holy Name when it was at Broadway and Harvard.
All right, perfect. Keep going. Where'd you go from there?
All righty. So from there, I went to the Cleveland State University. Took
You
me a little
gotta
while.
say that correctly. I know that.
The Cleveland State University, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I got out of Cleveland State, my first job was with the Treasury Department, U.S. Customs Service. So I was able to investigate all kinds of different importation law violations. I always remember my first day. I go in there, of course, the district director is late as always, so I'm sitting by myself. I get called into the big room to say my oath to the United States. So I raise my right hand, I say the oath, I'm going to protect, defend the United States of America, and then I sit down, and there's 5 boxes of pornography for me to investigate. And I'm like 21 years old and go, all right, what do I do with this? And I was told right away, you have to decide a couple things. Is it up to the decency standards of the United States? And second, does it have the country of origin written? Was it made in England or printed in England or whatever? So, of course, due to my Cleveland State University great education, I immediately thought, I remember that constitutional court case where it was basically, you know it when you see it, right? It was Justice Berger, I think. And so I tried to confirm that, and I was told, basically, if it doesn't make you ill, let it into the country. So here I am, 20 years old, looking at 5 boxes of pornography and thought, I'm going to be here for 30 years and retire. So that didn't last long. I went to become a Cleveland Heights police officer. So I did that for about 3 years, loved the job. Cleveland Heights was a little bit different than Slavic Village. The diversity in Cleveland Heights that I wasn't exposed to growing up, everything from Fairmount and the mansions in Cleveland Heights to the Hasidic Jews on Taylor to bordering East Cleveland. Cleveland Heights had it all. So it was a great learning environment. Did that, and then I decided, hey, what a better way to transition into insurance. There was a tiny little company way back then. It tells you how old I am. Very small, called Progressive Insurance. So this little tiny company based in Mayfield Heights said, hey, if you come work for us, we'll give you a company car. So I was sold. To get a company car, investigate claims.
Did they have pornography?
I could tell you stories there, for sure. But so I worked for Progressive for over 20 years, moved around the country. To survive a Progressive back then, you basically moved around the country before they caught up to you. So I did that, retired. I sat on the board of the National Insurance Crime Bureau, the Board of Governors, was also the chief claims officer at several carriers, been consulting, and I love history, always have loved history.
Well, but what I love what you said in the book, though, is everywhere you went, you traveled a lot. And everywhere you went, when you ran into Clevelanders, what'd they say? What'd they ask?
2 things, almost always. East side or west side? That's the first question, right? Second is, how bad will the Browns be this year? I think there's 350 Browns backers bars across the world, and I've been in plenty of them, and we all commiserate with each other, because there's Clevelanders everywhere.
Well, and that kind of, you said in the book that kind of started you down the path, that he created an entity called My Cleveland History. Tell us a little about that, and to uncover family roots, right?
Correct. I became a genealogist, sort of in my part-time. So I created My Cleveland History, but I really focus in on Cleveland history, immigration to Cleveland. It's trying to solve family mysteries for people. It's amazing how many folks don't know their immigrant grandparents, great-grandparents came to the United States, and they never talked about their spouse. Great-grandma never talked about grandpa, probably because he wasn't a war hero either. So a lot of different issues come up. So I volunteer at the Cuyahoga County Archives. I go there and research and help solve all kinds of family mysteries. I also do some historical consulting for a movie, as well as have helped the Cold Case Squad on recreating murder sites or missing people sites from way back when.
I have some cousins that are just mysteries.
Well, you have a famous grandfather. Maybe we could talk about that later.
All right. So listen, along the way, how the heck did you decide to write a book, guys? And it's a great book. It'll be available out front here. A pub crawl through Cleveland history through the taverns. Are you in AA?
No, but you should ask my wife if I should be.
All right. So how did you decide? How did you decide to do this book?
I never thought I would write a book. A publisher, Arcadia Publishing, called me up. And at first, of course, I thought it was a scam, right? Why do they want me to write a book? And then I did a little research and found out, no, it's a real. So, what should I write a book about? What else do I know but Cleveland taverns, old taverns? Where I grew up, there was a tavern on every corner, right? East 71st and Harvard, there were 10 bars within 2.5 blocks from my home. There were 71 taverns between East 71st, Harvard, and Fleet Avenue, less than a 2-mile radius. So I have very good memories from going to the little neighborhood bars from when I was a very young child.
Well, and one of the things I just love that you kind of touch on is, Cleveland really has kind of a tavern culture. In a way. I mean, this is kind of, the taverns were almost the center of the culture, correct?
Actually, I think of taverns as sort of your neighborhood living room, right? Because back when I was young, after dinner, you'd say you would walk over to the neighborhood tavern. They actually had air conditioner in the tavern, which we, of course, never had an air conditioner, a little window unit. The ball game was on. Everybody complaining, but the best thing about that was there was money on the bar. So all the guys would line the bar, all the money was there, and I thought, I will be able to play that bowling machine and pinball machine and drink the pop named after me, Little Tom, which my father told me was named right after me, all night long. So it's where you celebrated events at the tavern. You walked in there, and in my neighborhood, Polish, it was Polish on the jukebox playing, Polish language. It was where you got your next job. You commiserated, you mourned events there as well, both your personal events and events that happened in the city or nationally as well.
For sure. Now, it's really funny because I love this story. Guys, the book really starts with Cleveland's almost original saloon. One of the original settlers, Lorenzo Carter, what did he start? What business was he in? He had a saloon. He had a tavern. Tell that story.
Yeah, actually, if these drapes were open, we could probably see the site. It's literally right across. So Lorenzo Carter comes to Cleveland 1797. Remember, Moses Cleveland came the year before from Connecticut to sell all the plots of land here. So Moses sells property. What does he do? He books back to Connecticut. He doesn't stay. Why? This bug-infested river and the lake right here, not a whole lot going on. But Lorenzo Carter comes from Rutland, Vermont, settles in right on the banks of the Cuyahoga, and he sets up a cabin, which was the first tavern. It was where the first wedding was held in Cleveland, the first church service was held in Cleveland, and the first dance was held in Cleveland. And right away, before there was even a city, he started to get taxed. And by 1810, this Cuyahoga County came about, and you had to get a tavern license. And he paid $4 for a tavern license in 1810, which was quite a bit of money back then.
Now he eventually moved it, didn't he? Didn't he move it out on the Euclid Avenue, or what would become? Didn't he move it out?
He moved out, and his son Alonzo also, who was also in Newburgh too. So there was more than one, ultimately more tavern. But the Doan's Corner was named after Doan, who went over on 105th, and he set up, I believe, one of the early saloons as well. But right up the hill here is where all the early saloons were. One was called Shakespeare Saloon. If you look in the first city directory ever in Cleveland in 1837, you'll see Shakespeare spelled wrong. And they asked the owner, why'd you name it Shakespeare Saloon? And he said, that sounds like a very distinguished name. So he wanted all the highbrow customers of Cleveland.
All right, now one of the controversies is, how did Whiskey Island get its name? And I don't think we actually mentioned this, but it talks about the density that you talked a little bit in these neighborhoods. You know, we regularly feature John Grabowski from the Western Reserve Historical Society, and no one can really track this down definitively. But the story is, it was the highest density of Irish bars like ever created, were on what is now known as Windy Island and Whiskey Island, and it came from the Irish just, being loyal to their taverns.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the Irish were some of the first immigrants from Europe to come over to the United States. They started coming in the 1820s. Why? To build a canal. If you were working building a canal all day, wouldn't you want a drink?
Oh, yeah.
So the Irish, there were about 20 to 25 taverns just on Whiskey Island, small area. Irish Town Bend, by 1900, believed there were 30 taverns. So those early Irish, they led a really tough life, tough jobs. And then more and more came, right? The potato famine in Ireland was in 1845 to 1852. Area got very populated and moved up the hill as well.
Yeah, but again, they just loved their little local tavern, and they were very loyal to it. So let's get into some specific taverns that you tell stories about in the book. Let's start with Holt's Tavern.
I love Holt's. Holt's, about 10 minutes away from here up in Tremont. So Holt's has been around since 1919. Actually, the building got its first tavern license earlier than that. But John Holt's was a Russian immigrant, not Russian, a Russian immigrant. He came over, started the neighborhood tavern. And what was so common back then, every immigrant that come over that had a tavern, you live above the tavern, you get married, you have your children, you pass the tavern down. They cook in the tavern. They make awesome food in the tavern. Now, Holt's is so unique in that it has been handed down 4 generations. So John Holt's and Sheila run it today. They open at 4 o'clock. You can still get a $2 Rolling Rock in there at Holt's. And they have a 24-foot shuffleboard in Holt's. There's only 5 in the world that was made as long as that. Even more so, during Prohibition, it remained open. And during Prohibition, a very famous customer, too, went there, including Babe Ruth. Now, John Holt Sr., he cashed the checks of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. He kept that first paycheck of Babe Ruth and never had it cashed, and has it today, although he doesn't have it in the bar, which is probably a good move.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, I can't even imagine what that might be worth. Why don't they sell the bar, and get the hell out? Anyways,
that's right.
Let's go to another one. Mitzi German's bar. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's correct. 3840 St. Clair. Now that goes way back to about 1909. Now, Mitzi German, named after Mitzi. Now, Mitzi was born above that bar back in 1914. So I'll fast forward just a few years. So she's about 6 or 7 years old, right? Prohibition starts 1920. So during Prohibition, her mother and father taught her a lesson. And you could see that little stoop in front of the bar today. She would go out, sit on that stoop, and she was trained in that if anybody came to this tavern or to the location wearing black pants, white socks, and black shoes, they were a federal agent. And to run in and say, hey, it's a revenuer, and they would replace all the beer on the bar with lemonade. So they were never busted during that time. But Mitzi lived her entire 92 years, except the last 6 months of her life, at that bar. So Mitzi was there all 92 years. And the Plain Dealer years ago did an article about Mitzi, and they said she poured a drink with chemist concentration. Every drink was completely perfect. She'd watch every Indians game, and she kept score. I don't even remember how to keep score anymore. I used to be able, but you used to keep score on the pad every single game. She knew about all the businesses, all the factories, all the workers. So it was your neighborhood living room. It was a second home, and it's still open today.
That's just fantastic. There's another one over there, Literary Tavern.
Yeah, Literary Tavern is an awesome building. Just an awesome building. Believe it or not, that building was built before the Civil War. And remember that time period. Now, Camp Cleveland was just right across by the towpath, right? So it was a Civil War camp. But the Literary Tavern opened up way back. A lot of stuff happened there. It was named a bunch of different names through the years. But a Polish immigrant came, and he was the head of the Polish Lodge here in about 1930. And unfortunately, like many of these neighborhood taverns, the owner was murdered in a holdup. And then about 20 years later, and if you know Tremont, you know those streets are pretty narrow, right? Cars are usually parked on the side street too. But 1950, a tractor trailer went down Literary Street. Guys parked the tractor trailer, put stocking masks on, went inside and robbed it. Now, how you get a tractor trailer down Literary Road, I'll never know. Remember the movie The Deer Hunter, right? Filmed here, filmed St. Theodosius. Now, De Niro, he would go into the Literary Tavern all the time. He wanted to learn his character really well. So who was in the tavern back in 1977 when The Deer Hunter was filmed? A lot of Vietnam veterans, right? So he was able to talk to the Vietnam vets, learn his part more and more. He loved that bar so much that when the film ended and he went back to Hollywood, he took the bar stool with him. They gave it to him. And I do want to make a comment back to Holtz, though. When you asked John Holtz, did De Niro hang out here as well? Because there was a lot of rumors he did. He absolutely said, we don't want Hollywood types in this bar. So that's what Holtz said about him.
All right, one of the other great things that's in the book that I just love is you have some stories of some of the bartenders that you've come across in Cleveland. So some of the more famous bartenders that you've come across. Tell a couple stories about those.
Last weekend, I did a presentation at the Hungarian Museum. And at the Hungarian Museum, I did a real deep dive into Buckeye Road and tried to recreate the time of Buckeye Road back from really 1920 to 1960. There was 25 bars on Buckeye, Woodland, Woodhill in that little less than 2 mile stretch of road. And all the bar owners there, they were characters. One guy, John Vesey, his name was, a guy robs Cleveland Trust. There's a Cleveland Trust a block away on Buckeye Road and 116th. So he robs it, and he takes the deposit bag right from the bank. It says Cleveland Trust right on it. He stops at his store, buys steaks and grapes, and he goes into the bar. So he sits at the bar, and the owner looks at him, and like, what's going on here? And the robber says, call me a cab. And what does the owner say? Call your own cab, right? So all the patrons, they then call the police and arrest them for ripping off the bar or the bank. And another great story, the Gypsy Cellar. That was a famous bar here in Cleveland, opened about 1955 to 1972 in a couple different locations. The owner there was Joseph Robb. He was a violinist and a cymbalom player, and he looked just like Errol Flynn, they said, and a lot of people don't know who Errol Flynn is, so Google him, and you'll see he was a pretty handsome guy. But this, back then, remember, there was 43,000 Hungarians in that area back then. So, except for Budapest, Cleveland had more Hungarians than anywhere else in the world, back from 1920 to 1960. So, Joseph Robb, he was such a great host. He would make toast and drink all just drink his fine wine there, and he loved the ladies there too. His Zsa Zsa Gabor was in there all the time, for example. Myrna Loy, Robert Goulet, Liberace used to hang out there, Mayor Perk, and all the other politicians of the city of Cleveland. But Joseph Robb was really real character. He used to go to the White House. He played for Dwight D. Eisenhower, the White House, a couple times, his violin, and Eisenhower stopped there once for a campaign stop when he was running for president as well.
That's just fantastic. These stories are fantastic. All right, so, I know you came across, in addition to some of the bar owners, just some of the patrons who were characters too. There were some pretty famous characters at some of these bars.
Yeah, I think everybody that went to a bar back in Cleveland in those days was a character in their own right. Everybody went. Besides the guy that's stealing steaks and money from Cleveland Trust, we had another guy just right there on Buckeye Road too. He goes and murders two people in Akron. Where do you think you go after you murder two newlyweds? And he had a crush on the woman that got married. He went straight to Buckeye Road and was sitting at the bar until someone else recognized him and called the police. But a lot of the patrons, they always went to the same bar. So you would have 20 bars, and you would have the same people there night after night, and a lot of them became legendary in their own right.
And and one of the things that, again, you talk a little bit about is all the ball players who had their favorite bars. Again, Babe Ruth would go out after a game, and he had his favorite bars in Cleveland.
Yeah, and think back on Short Vincent. Short Vincent today is what? Nothing but parking spots, right? Parking garages. Back then, Short Vincent, from East 9 to East 6, that's only 485 feet long. And Short Vincent had 15 bars in that 485 feet. And back then, one of the most famous bars there was the Theatrical Lounge, right? Theatrical was extremely famous, owned by Mushy Wexler for a while, and also by Chandra Burns, although he wasn't legally allowed to own a bar. But nonetheless, that bar was famous, and it brought in all the New York Yankees too. Later date New York Yankees, right? DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Billy Martin. So a lot of the celebrities that came into Cleveland, the politicians, all the newspaper reporters, Short Vincent was sort of the place to go for a lot of the sports stars.
And you mentioned him, Chandra Burns. Tell a little bit about stories that, because you came across him and talk about him in the book.
Anytime you investigate or research any crime in Cleveland's history, you're going to come up with Chandra Burns. So Chandra Burns was public enemy number one in Cleveland. He was born way back 1909, I believe. And 5 decades of crime. And it was racketeering, murder, gambling, vice, you name it. But he never spent much time in prison. He was sent away to the workhouse a few times. But for some reason, people did not want to be a witness and testify against him. Don't know why, but they never did. They didn't testify. So Chandra actually, during Prohibition, his mother was making mash in their house. So she's making mash off of 55th and Woodland. She catches fire and she died. So that sent Chandra on quite a journey and quite a path, really, for the rest of his life. So I mentioned I volunteer at the county archives. We have all the arrest cards from 1920s to about 1970s. Chandra was arrested so many times here, he has his own drawer. That just tells you how often he was arrested. But, he finally hit his fate. His luck ran out in 1975.
Right up the hill.
Right up the hill here next to by St. Malachi. So it's Easter Eve, 1975. Church service, right? Church is letting out about 8 o'clock at night. All of a sudden there's a mass explosion. Well, Chandra was blown up in his car right up the hill. The bar was called Christie's at the time he was blown up. An interesting side note with that crime as well is that Chandra went everywhere with his German Shepherd. He loved his German Shepherd, but this is the one time he didn't take his German Shepherd because he was going out of town after he left Christie's, luckily. So I had that story verified. That was from newspaper accounts. But a guy came up to me at one of my talks and he goes, we lived on Judson, right next to Chandra Burns, and we loved his dog. We didn't like that our house was shot at every week. However, and we weren't crazy about Chandra, but we loved his dog. Now, Chandra was enemies with Danny Green. The rumor was Danny Green had blown him up, and I learned this as well, which is, I don't think, common knowledge. Another bar right here, right up the hill, called Carney's, right? It used to be called Ginley's way back in the day. So they said that night in 1975, a couple associates of Danny Green's were sitting in the bar in Carney's and heard an explosion that occurred and did a little toast. So Danny got his a few years later, of course.
Yeah, well, and I don't think people realize he became actually the mobs, all mobs, the Jewish mob, the Italian mob, the black mob. He became their financier. I mean, he really was one of the most powerful mobsters ever in the history of Cleveland.
Absolutely. Another bar owner as well by the name of Don King. You may have heard of him, the boxing promoter, right? So Don King actually went to the Cleveland police and made a complaint against Chandra back in 1955 and said, Chandra just tried to blow up my house. So they're turning each other in. Don did not want to give Chandra a cut from the numbers rackets, right? So without a cut, Chandra goes, I'm going to blow up your house. And it was not completely blown up at that time. It took 10 more years, and then it was.
Unbelievable. All right, so there are literally a lot of very historic bars, and you've already mentioned a bunch. But there are a couple here in the Flats that we're pretty proud of. Talk a little bit about the Harbor Inn, right up here.
Yeah, you have to pretty much pass it to get out of here, right? I don't know if there's another way. So 1895, Harbor Inn started. So it goes back, they say the oldest bar in Cleveland, still in operation, obviously. Still looks pretty much the same, too, right? If you go around there, didn't put a lot of money in there. But I remember when I was, in my 20s or maybe even a little bit younger, going into the Harbor Inn, and it was always cool to look at all the bars from around the world, right? Before that was a popular thing where you got imported beer. So, but the rumor had it was sailors from around the world would come to Cleveland, and when they came to Cleveland, they would bring a bottle of beer and they would stack it. Obviously, later on, they would just import the beer directly. However, those early years, it was sailors and dock workers that frequented it. Harbor Inn, they rang the bell at night, at closing time every night, at the home of where darts, really, the Cleveland Darting League back in the early 1970s occurred as well. So it's still, it's a survivor. It's hung in there no matter what else has gone on through all the years in Cleveland.
Can you verify, or did you try to verify, is it the oldest one in the city of Cleveland?
I get that question quite a bit, and I always deflect that. And the reason I do is people want to get in arguments about what is a bar, what is a tavern, what is a saloon. My response is it's a place where people gather. Most of the time there is a bar they could sit at. They drink, they talk, they socialize, they talk about it, the immigrant bars, they talk about the old country. But people say that was a bowling alley, it wasn't a bar. Or Guarino's, which opened way back in 1919 in Little Italy, right? And if you go into Guarino's, you'll notice there's beads hanging from the walls, from the ceilings, right? If you go there today. Well, they're not the same beads necessarily, but those beads were put up there during Prohibition. So those Cleveland policemen would walk up and down Mayfield Road, and when they turned their head, they couldn't see somebody drinking at the bar. So that's why their beads are up there still today. But getting back, so I think the Harbor Inn, I would say it's pretty clear it probably is. Now the Raleigh Inn, awesome awesome bar. I really try to get folks to come in from the suburbs, to come back in the city, frequent some of these neighborhood bars that have been there forever. They have great food. They're just great places to be. So the Raleigh Inn, 1906. And I always tell folks, when you go to the Raleigh Inn,
This is in Tremont, and out the window you can see the Christmas Story house. It's literally right across the street from what is now a museum.
right. If your first time there, don't go in the middle of December because there's buses parked up and down the road. So it's a little bigger. But please do this if you go there. Walk across the street to where between the Christmas Story house and the Bumpus's house. Walk to the edge. There's a rail there, but you look down at the mills. You look at the blast furnaces. You look at the fires coming up. And you can really imagine what Cleveland was like. That's what Cleveland really is. So when folks come from out of town, I always take them to the Raleigh Inn, and I always have to walk across the street to the edge to look down and just imagine, when Cleveland was almost 1 million people within the city.
And again, they would climb that hill to get to that bar at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Was really just a few ways out of the mills. On the other side, you go up the hill, up Dilly Hill and on Broadway. And you end up on Broadway, and there was about 15 to 20 bars right around East 30th to East 55th.
Yeah, fantastic. Another one of my favorite down here is the Flatiron. I mean, I love the guys who own it now, and that's just been around forever.
Yeah, that opened up, and actually the building itself, I believe, dates back to the late 1800s. And does everybody know, if you go by on your way home tonight, it's 2 stories. It was 4 stories, that building. It was opened up as a blacksmith shop back in the late 1800s, and then there was a fire. Fire was set allegedly by a prostitute that ran her business on the 3rd or 4th floor. So it caught fire, and so no more top 2 floors, but it's been cranking really ever since. And I ran into a bartender at another presentation, and he said it was haunted. And if you go to any Cleveland haunted tours, you go to Flatiron, because Flatiron is notorious as a haunted location of Cleveland. But he always felt his skin crawl at closing time when he was there alone. The other thing is, every time they hung a new photo up at the Flatiron, soot would still come out of the wall, even as of today.
That's fantastic. All right, so you've talked a lot. There are some great ethnic bars in Cleveland, great Afro-American taverns. You talk about this. You already talked about Don King's Corner Tavern. Talk a little bit about Leo's.
Yeah, Leo's was 2 locations. The first one, it was on Central Avenue, and then it burned down, which was very common. Most taverns did burn down one time or another. But then it opened up at 75th and Euclid Avenue. And the Corner Tavern and Leo's today, they were so famous for the music that they brought to Cleveland, is that they're landmarks with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum. So if you go down to where Corner Tavern was on Cedar, 78th and Cedar, there's a plaque hanging up that says, this is where music made history. So all the Motown greats performed there. At Leo's Tavern, it was Otis Redding's last performance the next night he died. And at Leo's Tavern, beside the clientele, it was black, white. It was a very integrated place. And the Call-in Post said Leo's Casino did more for integration than any court case ever did for the city of Cleveland.
For sure. It's an amazing story. All right, so you've touched on this a little bit. Talk a little bit about some of the mysterious events that occurred at some taverns around Cleveland.
Oh boy, you get me on this one. I gotta dig back. So I will go back to my old neighborhood when I was young here. So one of the mysterious events was at the end of our street over, was called a place called the Golden Mule. I don't know if anybody heard it. It was pretty infamous bars. So one of the mysteries that hung out there, well, first of all, back in the 60s and 70s, if you had a jukebox or a cigarette machine, you had to give a portion of that proceeds back to the mob, right? They were all controlled by organized crime. And guess what the mystery was? Every night at closing time, there was what they call a stink bomb placed on the front stoop of the Golden Mule. So every night at closing, they tried every which way to prohibit people from coming to that bar. I was a young guy, about 14, 15 years old, and they had signs up that said go-go dancers. So being the inquisitive youth that I was,
Early pornography.
yeah, I guess it was training for the real world. We climbed up on the roof one night, and the rumor was more than go-go dancing was going on at the Golden Mule. So we climb up on the roof, and we go up, and we try to peek through the windows, and we could. Curtains were open a little bit, and we saw some stuff that startled us so badly, we knocked something over, and we broke it. So the glass had shattered, and there's 3 of us on the roof. So I jump off and run home. What do my other two buddies go? Hell no, we love this. We're going to stick here. Well, the police decided to come there, so they weren't too concerned about the mysterious happenings on the 2nd floor of the Golden Mule. And a few years later, actually, there was a fire there at the Golden Mule, and the Cleveland Fire Department found, and we're talking in the 70s, they found hidden cameras up on the 2nd floor. So technology, even back then, they had closed-circuit taverns in the walls.
Maybe that's what you were looking at years later. Anyways, you touched on the movie, that became famous here. But there has been a lot of TV shows and other movies where it was focused around some of the bars in town. Talk a little bit about some of those stories.
Drew Carey Show, of course. The Warsaw Tavern, that was the name of the bar, right? And this TV show. Well, there really was a Warsaw Tavern, but it was on Lansing Avenue in Slavic Village. It wasn't on Memphis in Old Brooklyn, where Drew Carey is actually from. So Drew Carey's inspiration was the Memphis Plaza Bar, which is still a bar today, too. Right over, I believe, on the corner of Memphis and Ridge. Murphy's Law, that's right, yeah. Still open, right? Since I wrote the book, some of the bars, unfortunately, have already closed, so I'm always very, very careful to say that. How about the old Euclid Tavern? We're talking movie, right? The Light of Day with Joan Jett and Michael J. Fox back in 1987. So that made the Euclid Tavern famous. And if you wanted to see that, that famous sign, the big Euclid Tavern sign, go down to Nashville because it's hanging up in Jason Aldean's bar today. So it's hanging up there still. Of course, the Raleigh Inn, above the Raleigh Inn on the 2nd floor, that was makeup and wardrobe back in 1983 for the Christmas Story movie as well.
Cool. All right. So one of the things you brought tonight is your newest book, Cleveland's Ohio City Neighborhood. What was your inspiration here? Because I know this will be available out front too.
Yeah, absolutely. Cleveland's Ohio City, I lived on Clinton for a little while. Not as long as I wish I did. I love living in Ohio City, walking around the neighborhood. So Ohio City had everything, right? The book actually starts with when Ohio City, it was actually before Cleveland, right? It became incorporated like 3 weeks before Cleveland. And there was the Bridge War right down here, Columbus Street Bridge War. And then I go through the magnificent churches that were there. The resurgence first the Depression back in the 1950s, 1960s, how the neighborhood had changed, how rough it became, and then how it had bounced back over time. But between the architecture and the churches and actually the people of Ohio City, there was quite a story to tell. And that book has 160 images. And if they say photos could say 1,000 words. That's a lot of words in that book because they're all, and again, where do I get a lot of my images? From the Cleveland Public Library of Mr. John Skirdick. Yeah. So they're awesome, and they have a lot of photos that aren't online that you can actually request and they'll get for you.
So I'm looking forward to reading it and learning more about it. So, folks, let's turn it over now. Do you have a favorite bar that he hasn't mentioned yet? And want to ask a question about that? Don't look at me like you haven't been to a bar. All right, go ahead at the bar. Go ahead, Bill. Anything you got on Prosperity, again, in Tremont?
Absolutely, a couple blocks down. This is what I always tell folks from the suburbs. Come down, go to the Prosperity Club for dinner, have a drink, walk 2 blocks over and go to Stop at Hote's. That's a great night. If you got a little more time, go over to Raleigh Inn or the Lit. But Prosperity Club was called Dempsey's, right? Dempsey's was the original Prosperity. Dempsey's Oasis. Somebody asked Dempsey, why did you call it Dempsey's Oasis? And he said, an oasis is something out there that you're longing for. You're trying to get to an oasis. That never really hit it big, so the name really dropped off. But Dempsey was the original owner, and then it became the Prosperity Club, I think about 2005. And awesome patio, awesome Eastern European food still, and that opened up, I believe, about 1938.
Now, here's a little fun side fact. My brother lives right next door literally right across the alleyway in what is known as the bathhouse. And so all the steel workers would climb up the hill and as a group go to the bathhouse after working in the steel mill to take a community bath. I would want that bar next door. All right, some other hands. Go ahead, yell it out. Otto Mosier's.
Yeah, the last place on East 4th. I actually have a big poster board of Otto Mosier's as well. So a good friend of mine, his name is Chris Roy. Now, Chris Roy just finished a book about 6 months ago. It's called Otto Mosier's Neighborhood, The History of Vaudeville in Cleveland. So he has that out, and he has had access to all that memorabilia, all the memorabilia on the wall from all the vaudevillians. Now, Otto Mosier, he had a famous quote at the end of Prohibition. So 1933, the plain dealer came in and they said, well, what did you think about those last 13 years, Otto? And he said, those were pretty sour times. Everybody hated their neighbor. So that was Otto's quote at the time, and it lasted for about 90 years or so.
There you go. Go ahead. Yell it out. Duck Island in terms of a location for bars.
No, there was the Duck Island Inn. It was a little bar.
Oh, Duck Island Inn.
You got me, man. You got me.
You found one he doesn't know about.
See that? No.
Is it still alive, you think?
I think it's closed.
The Duck Island Inn, huh?
Well, you got to remember, let's put things in perspective here, too. So there were, in Cleveland in the 60s, over 1,700 bars, okay? Back in the turn of the century, back in 1900, there were over 2,000 bars. There were so many that Cleveland enacted a law that there could only be one tavern for every 500 residents. And then what happened? Prohibition started, right? So Prohibition started. You think that took the problem away? No. There were 2,600 speakeasies in Cleveland, so one for every 375 people.
Yeah.
That one didn't make my cut, sorry.
There you go right there. Yell it out. Most infamous mob bars in Cleveland. Well, theatrical, you mentioned a little bit. Are there others?
Well, in Little Italy, actually on Murray Road, I don't know if I'd necessarily call them mob bars, but there was some violent happenings. The library over in Little Italy as well on Murray Road, all those bars that are now art shops and boutiques, they were all little neighborhood taverns. But I will tell you one, not necessarily the mob, but you got to think back in the times, back in the 60s, right? There was a bar called Bardo's on East 93rd. And that's when motorcycle gangs really became prevalent in Cleveland back in the 60s. So you had the Hells Angels, and another rival gang was called God's Children. Now, God's Children actually was an integrated gang. Hells Angels was not. The Hells Angels had their clubhouse on East 93rd, and they went looking for trouble one night. They went across the street to Bardo's. I was very young at the time, and I remember going in there with my dad. They had a little bowling machine. And so they, Hells Angels, 10 or 12 of them go in. There's a black guy and a white guy at the bar, none of the God's children, and they murdered the two. So that was a pretty infamous occurrence. That started a big expose on motorcycle gangs in Cleveland in the late 1960s, written by a Clevelander, Joe Esterhaus, who is a pretty big Hollywood producer today.
Very cool. Go ahead, yell it out.
Yes, Sachsenheim Hall. At one time, they were saying they were the oldest operating bar in Cleveland.
Say it again.
Sachsenheim Hall.
Saxonheim Hall.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I actually talked about the Saxonheim Tavern. I got a photo. Actually, when they had a fire in my book, I got a photo of that too. So yeah, they absolutely go back. And a lot of the ethnic social clubs, the Bohemian National Hall on Broadway, right? That goes back to before 1900, without a doubt. The Polish American Cultural Center a little after that, and the Slovenian home a little after that as well. But all those, again, that's part of the what is a bar and what is not a bar. But you know, you're absolutely right. If it classified some of the social halls, that could add to the discussion.
All they did was drink. Okay, go ahead, yell it out. Old Angle.
I love the Old Angle. Went there a lot to watch a bar, and if you're a soccer fan, that's the place to go, right? Now, Old Angle, the first time I went to Old Angle, right there on 25th and Bridge, you know, I thought it was a really old bar. It had that kind of feel to it. Well, it's not that old. That actually opened up as a shoe store back in 1910. So that's a beautiful building they're in, right? That really old brick building there, where Old Angle is on the corner. But it hasn't been around forever. I forget the date or the year that it had opened up, but it hasn't been around. But great food, great crowd, and hopefully it's going to continue for a long period.
All right, right here, go ahead.
Another relatively new, but Brothers Lounge.
Brothers Lounge, again, a
Yeah, in
music
Detroit.
place.
Yeah, Detroit around 117th. I think I have a photo. I'm not sure if the photo made the cut in my book on that, but I do talk about really the border of Lakewood, right? And that was an interesting time too. I do talk a lot about the LGBTQ community in the bars. Going way back to the 1940s, there was a bar downtown called the Cadillac Lounge, and there was Little Ted's down there too. At the Cadillac, you had to be within 12. You could not be within 12 inches from anyone else in that bar. Interesting place. But as I researched Detroit up through 117th, that's where a lot of the bars actually moved and relocated. But Brothers has been there for a long time with great entertainment.
All right, I'll get both of you. You first, go ahead. Tony's at Cam's Corner.
I don't remember specifically talking Cam's Corners, but Cam's Corner's unique. I spoke to the West Park Historical Society about 6 months ago over at PJ McIntyre's. And at Cam's is one of the only neighborhoods where there was more bars in the 2000s than there were in the 1960s. And that had to do with Cam's Corners was really, in its most neighborhoods, right? They were self-contained. You had your butcher, you had a bakery, you had a grocery store, you had a bowling alley, you had the hardware store. And that was Cam's Corners. They had a few bars, no doubt about it, but it became really popular. And the Irish community, you know, of all the different ethnic groups and the number of ethnic bars that are open, unfortunately, most all have declined, except the Irish. The Irish keep cranking. The Irish keep cranking, and more Irish bars continue to open up. So,
Very good. Question, go ahead. Moriarty's.
yeah, I could visually see that photo of Moriarty's over there by East 6th as well. So yeah, I do have a section on downtown Cleveland, and back in the day when Moriarty's. That was open till what? About 2009, 2010, I believe, something like that.
Very cool place, though. I've been there many
Yeah.
times. Go ahead. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
Judd's-
got them both. I have photos in my book of both, Judd's and the Ugly Broad. Now, the Ugly Broad is no more, right? Well, it's not a couple years ago. That's ancient in bar time. You know? think they were changing the name. It might still be a bar, but somebody correct me if you know better than I. But yeah, the sign was awesome, and I write about it because some people around the neighborhood didn't quite like that connotation when they drove down Denison. Drive down Denison and you see the ugly broad. But that made a great photo. No doubt about it. And Judd's, too, with the mural on the side of Judd's Tavern.
Very cool. Go ahead. Clark Bar.
Yeah, the Clark Bar.
She's asking about a candy bar. So
Yeah. The Clark Bar, actually, I was given a presentation or actually a fair at Riverside Cemetery, and I was challenged. A guy with a shirt came up that said Clark Bar, and he was the owner, and he asked about the bar, and I actually wrote in the book. In the 1970s, it was voted the best dive bar in Cleveland. So
there you go.
It almost brought tears to this big eyes. So
Go ahead.
great bar, but I'm staying in the city limits, or I would have wrote the book longer than War and Peace. Next
Folks,
volume.
Big round of applause for Tom, everybody. He's got a couple great books out in the lobby. Tom, thank you so much. This guy knows every bar. I worry about your health. Folks, please consider coming next week for Mike Polk. It's a funny night. And the week after that, Terry Pluto. Everybody get home safe, okay?